there will be we need to pay special attention to leadership. We need to pay special attention to entrepreneurship. Uh, Therefore, there will be focused attention on each of these subjects. Talking of leadership, I have seen that if you start your early career in the sales part of the business, you tend to find it easier and to climb onto the leadership platform earlier. Although you are called a sales manager, you you are in reality a sales leader. When you manage sales, unlike you're managing production or managing accounts or managing HR, when you manage sales, you realize that you really cannot command, you cannot direct. You really have to understand human beings. What makes them go? What inspires them? What gives them confidence? And what makes them deliver outstandingly, even when you are not watching? Because most often salespeople work all by themselves out in the field, far away when the bosses are not watching. So being a sales manager often trains you to become a leader, is my thinking. And today, all the three people who are speaking to us today have started their careers in sales. Very much like our mentor and guru, Mr. V. Narayanan, who headed Pons. And I used to be very amused to see Mr. Narayanan speaking to someone in a plane and within 15 minutes trying to persuade them to do something. The salesman in him never went away, although he became chairman and managing director at a fairly young age. Now, K. Anand, or Kandy, as is well known, is someone who started in sales in Pons. But after Pons, he did some things something that amazed me. All of a sudden, he accepted a job with Coca-Cola in Latin America. He made it a point to learn Spanish. How he managed a very important and responsible job in a country whose language he had to learn in a short time amazes me. Now, apart from that, he came out to Atlanta to manage very high-level jobs in Coke, very challenging jobs, I must say. And from then on, he moved to a beer company, Molson Coors. And even there, he didn't rest. He agitated the beer, brought a lot of froth. He brought in huge acquisitions. Therefore, I'm very eager to listen to Kandy. I'm seeing him after a long time. I've seen him only a couple of weeks before. Until then, Kandy, would it have been 24 years since we met last? Huh?
Yep, probably.
Okay, now over to you, Kandy. You can start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balraman and Group Captain Vijay Kumar. So, dear friends, this is, in a way, as Mr. Balraman, you're mentioning a real homecoming for me. Because, of course, Pons was my first job, starting in 1980 in Chennai, Madras, we used to call it then, at the age of 22. And that is where I got married. We had all our three daughters were born there. I have lots of friends, relatives in Chennai. And of course, all our ex-Pons colleagues. Interestingly, so I lived in Chennai between 1980 and 1992. And those 12 years is the longest I have lived in one place in my life. I have not before or since then lived that long, though in a year, Denver will overtake that record if I continue to stay in Denver. But I do want to compliment you, Mr. Balram, for starting something with this community of the Pons veterans that is well beyond what I could have envisioned. You've brought back this incredibly talented and successful group who are engaged to connect and share their experiences, who are, full of energy to start doing things that are meaningful. And unlike all other groups that I'm part of, including IIM and or IIT or my high school, etc., it is non-political, non-sensational. And that's your leadership ability, Mr. Balram, that you've been able to craft this with a purpose, which I think is tremendous. I see, certainly in the US, everybody I speak to is fascinated by, which pro or anti-rally they want to talk about, or, in India, from what I can see from my friends, they're fascinated by murder investigations or kind of whether Anushka did spin bowling or pace bowling. But, this group has kept itself well above that level, which is really credit to you. And similarly, I have to thank my two co-panelists, Tiger and Gopal. In a way, the talk that I'm going to give, and supported by these two gentlemen, is a continuation of a lot of the leadership talks given by Nandu Nandkishore, Tiger himself, Kripalu, Atul Vora, number of people. And they're all focused on themes, on kind of parts of leadership that are critical. And some of my colleagues have brought more research than I think I'm going to in this speech, because my talk is going to be most based on my experiences, anecdotes, some successes, some failures that have led me to learn things that I'd like to talk about. So I don't think Tiger or Gopal need much more introduction. They've been supremely successful. But all I can say is I had the privilege of working with them 35 odd years back. And even then, it was clear to me that they were among the most talented people that I have worked with in my career. And kind of that was the reason I picked the two of them, because I knew that, they have been very much part of the success that I've had. So with that, let me get into, before I get into a framework that I'm going to talk about, around which I want to talk about, my adventures in leading self-team and organization, I think I want to talk a little bit about just myself and my journey, because that'll put in context some of the things I'm going to talk about. So I did most of my schooling in this beautiful city you see on the left, which is Jodhpur. So I grew up in a small town, almost in a very kind of conservative small community in a very small, relatively small school. And I think that shaped very much a lot of my values. And I think those of you who heard Anand Kripalu speak in the series, he spoke about a similar experiences of, when you grow up in middle class and in surroundings that are, relatively modest, you grow up with some values, and you grow up with family roots. You grow up with striving, a willingness to work hard, being personally frugal, but yet wanting great success, kind of leading to some of the values that my other friend Atul Vora spoke about, which is Nishkam, kind of way of doing business. So from there, I of course went to IIT and IIM, and then it was just a straight line. I joined Ponds, as Mr. Balram said, in sales. I remained in sales throughout my career in Ponds. So unlike many of my colleagues, I did not move across. So I started in sales. I was area sales manager in South. Within 3 years, I was running the South region. And within 7 years, I was running the national sales. Running a sales force of well over 200 when you're under 30 is, it's quite a responsibility, but it also teaches you a lot. Mr. Balram, to your point on leadership, leadership not just of the fact that you're leading these large teams, but also leadership of the responsibility that comes with having those kind of leadership positions. How you have to be authentic, sincere, truly wanting, and liking the people, and delivering results at the same time. Taking hard decisions when you need to, but always doing it with great empathy, great sincerity, and great respect. In 1991, I started having the first, what I call, twist in my career. So I got an offer from Hindustan Lever at that time, who had taken over the Ponds operation, to run the South region as branch manager for levers. And I thought it was a good stepping stone. It was very much in my kind of zone, both kind of running a even much larger sales business, but also it was in South region that I knew well. So I moved on to that. That still seemed like a straight line. After a couple of years of doing that, I got a call from Harish Manwani, who at that time was kind of running marketing in detergents and was just going to take over personal products business in levers. And he said, listen, you've had a really spectacular sales career. We think you have great potential, but I think it's time for you to do some marketing. But since you don't have any brand marketing experience, you will have to take a demotion to do that. So you'll have to go from your current level to 2 levels below. And you will be marketing manager of detergents, of some of the detergents. And is that something you want to do? It was a tough decision, right? For somebody who's had constant promotions and is kind of running this big organization, it was a tough decision. But nevertheless, I thought it made a lot of sense. If I wanted a career, then I had to do this. So this was the first of my 2, I'd say, demotions, both of which worked out spectacularly well for me. So I took that demotion and I went into levers, moved to Bombay from Chennai, and started working on brands like Surf, Rin, Wheel, and basically all market leaders in detergents. It was spectacular. I'll talk about some of those experiences as part of my talk, but it turned out to be truly an amazing experience. I learned a lot. Not only did I learn a lot, I also was able to, I think, contribute a lot to the lever success at that time. So my career with levers was going extremely well. And Keki Dadi said, who was running the business at that time, told me that, it's time, and within a year, we want you to go run one of our businesses. So, it seemed like everything was up and up. At that time, I had an interesting experience. We had a sales conference in Simla. So we had, I think it was a North Region sales conference for levers. So we had this sales conference, and a colleague of mine, Ashwini Mehta, who was running kind of some of the wheel supply chain in the business, and I went from Simla, took a small drive to a place called Kufri, where we heard there might be snowfall. And we had never seen snowfall in our lives. So we said, let's go see it. On the way back, and it did snow, it snowed a lot, the roads were slippery. And as this taxi with the taxi driver was driving down this road from Kufri to Simla, it seemed like he was slipping. So we kept telling him, maybe we should stop, maybe we should wait. The road seems slippery. So this driver tells us, I have driven these with closed eyes, don't you worry. I know how to manage. So fine, he kept driving. And at one particular turn, the car started sliding. And I could see this is going over the edge. So I opened the door, told Ashwini, jump, Ashwini, immediately. And we both jumped, literally, and the car went over the cliff. Unfortunately, the driver, who was rescued actually by Army, there was a convoy of Army going nearby, did not survive that accident. So anyway, coming out of that, it kind of woke me up to a number of existential things, as you can imagine. And somehow it struck me that this life doesn't have to be straight line. And that's when I got this interesting call from a friend of mine who's a headhunter, who told me, do you want to see, this was 1997, and do you want to see Britain handing over Hong Kong from the Mandarin Oriental sitting on top of the Hong Kong terrace? I said, I'd love to, but seems like a tough thing to do. He said, don't worry, somebody's going to pay for everything. You're going to spend 5 days there. You're going to watch all the ceremonies as a VIP. I said, there must be a catch. He said, yeah, you just have to do a few interviews. And you can say no at the end of it. So I went ahead and I did that, quite convinced I'm going to say no. And that was a Coca-Cola interview session. And they came back and they said, well, do you want to be marketing director in India? And I said, why would I do that? I'm already marketing director of levers on detergents. I'm probably going to run a business. It doesn't make sense. So after about a few months, they came back and said, fine, you wanted an adventure? How about being marketing director of Latin America, based in Buenos Aires? And that's how I started kind of my next phase. And it just seemed something that enticed my family and me. And we got into a full-fledged adventure and moved from Mumbai on to Buenos Aires. And I'll talk a little bit about what Mr. Balaraman said about the challenge of moving to a new country, new language, new company, all at the same time. And Mr. Balaraman told me this 2 weeks ago. That was foolish, wasn't it? And the answer is yes, it was really foolish. Looking back, I mean, it worked out fine, but it could have worked out disastrously too.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
So after that, I've had many twists and turns. I moved to Atlanta. I went to Southeast Asia, to Philippines, and ran Coke business there. Since the last 10 years, I've been in Denver, which is where you see now I have plenty of snow, more snow than I'd imagined. I ran the international business. I was CEO of International for Molson Coors. And the last 2 to 3 years, I was Chief Growth Officer, trying to really do some of the newer, kind of more cutting edge things. I ran M&A for them. And since January this year, I've set up my own business of igniting business growth, really with my passion of trying to get businesses across the world to get to growth. So that's my background. The reason I'm giving you this in detail is kind of sets the stage of some of the stories that I'm going to speak about as I think about leadership.
You are speaking from Seattle, right?
I'm right now speaking from Seattle. I have to say, I started at 5:30 a.m. this call. So at times, if you see me reaching out for my cup of tea, it's because it's still very dark outside and it's 5:30. Yeah. I'm here in with my grandkids who are 1 year old. So that's why I'm here in Seattle. So, so today's topic is really about how do you get sustainable breakthrough success through what I call an integrated model. Often when you look at leadership frameworks, it's either about how you become a great leader, which is what I call living leadership or leading the self, or it's often about how do you get enterprises to become great. It's leading organizations, leading teams. Or it's about how do you kind of focus and become kind of a more of an expert, right? But I believe that real breakthrough success happens when, whether you are a CEO, whether you are starting in your career, whether you're mid-career, whether you're whichever stage you're in, if we can keep these three things integrated and keep all of them in mind. They're all individual pieces for leadership. but they need to be integrated, and that creates a sustainable breakthrough success. And this is very much from a corporate and a business or an enterprise of any kind perspective versus completely personal, right? Otherwise, I would add things like spiritual or other areas to this. But essentially, I find if you can lead yourself, truly in terms of being a leader, if you can have the ability to lead an organization successfully and build expertise in you, and this combination is what creates sustainable breakthrough. And so that's kind of the topic that the three of us are going to talk about. I'm going to talk majority, and then my two panelists will intervene when they think they have a point to make, or else as well as in certain breaks that we're going to have. So I'm going to start actually without getting into too much detail about leading teams and organizations and how do you build expertise. And I'm going to do that without getting into too much detail and spend more of my time on living leadership, leading self, which will happen after we take a break and do some questions. So let me start with leading teams and organizations and basically enterprise leadership. I want to touch on three things. And this is really based on my experience. This is not a framework that I've taken from any book at this time, but this is something that I've kind of distilled based on my experience. First is that to be able to lead an organization, you need to be able to lead people, and you need to be able to set an inspiring culture. And inspiring is an important word versus motivating or kind of a culture that's performing, because I think inspiring, I believe, leads to all of that. The second piece is the business needs to have a commercial edge, needs to have true commercial edge on different aspects, and we'll speak about it. And without that commercial edge, and commercial includes whether it's supply chain or production or sales or marketing or brands or innovation, but it needs to have an edge in terms of what it does commercially. And organizations need to look at the future. They need to shape, not just have a competitive advantage for the present, but need to be able to continuously think about shaping the future, right? It is not just meeting today's demand, but thinking about how you're going to shape what the future is going to be, anticipate it, but not even anticipate it, create it, right? Shape it. So those are the three areas that I'm going to speak about in this section. So starting with people and an inspiring culture, I find that four of these things that I've seen in my experience have worked tremendously in every organization that has been successful, and have not worked during the times or the periods when our organization has not been successful. One is inspiring vision. Second is a balance between flair, an organization having that kind of a flair to do things versus a rigor and a process and an ability to kind of manage things, and having that balance. Being able to trust, empower, but also hold people accountable, and continuing to invest in future capability. So those are the four areas. Let me tell you a couple of kind of my experiences and stories on each of these. Starting with vision, and all of you have heard a lot of visions, a lot of different organizations that have used vision tremendously in terms of how they have grown their business, how they've unified their business, how they've created huge leaps. I want to talk about Coca-Cola in that regard. Now, Coca-Cola is an interesting organization. At the time I joined, which was 1996, interestingly, it had only 3 CEOs in the previous close to 100 years. So very long-term CEOs who created vision and truly kind of built the business. Thereafter, it's had a series of changes. So the time that Coca-Cola truly became successful was during the World War II and in the aftermath of World War II. And it came with the then CEO Robert Woodruff's vision, which was essentially that I want to have a Coke available wherever there is an American soldier at 5 cents, no matter which end of the world, and that they should have a cold Coca-Cola available to them for 5 cents wherever they are. And to make that vision real, they went into 130, 140 countries in a matter of 2 years, set up bottling plants, set up all kinds of refrigeration and kind of cold availability, and created Coca-Cola to be available in all these countries, which explains why Coke has been far more successful globally and internationally, even though they had a much more of a fight in the US with Pepsi. Because after World War II, the American soldiers went everywhere in the world, and Coke followed them or preceded them in many cases to all these countries. Once that vision was kind of reached, the vision, which came by the next CEO, Roberto Goizueta, who was running Coke at the time I was joining, he died soon after, but was that he wanted Coke within an arm's reach of desire of every human being in this world. So that's a simple vision, but it has a tremendous sense of purpose for the organization. So both of these created a sense of purpose, right? We want anybody who wants a Coke, has a desire for Coke, have a ability to get the Coke cold within an arm's reach. I mean, think about it, right? I'm sitting here, I want a Coke, within an arm's reach, I want to be able to get a Coke. And that created everything from, how do you get to every corner, every village, every town? How do you get cold refrigeration in every single of these places? How do you create the desire that people need to, people want it? And that led to this tremendous second golden period for Coke between 94, 95 to about 98. I think the market cap went up 4 to 5 times during this period. And the business really exploded just by following this and then making it real everywhere. And it instilled a sense of purpose in all of us. And that's kind of one of the reasons I joined Coca-Cola. I felt there was a tremendous expression of what the company wanted to do. With that, I want to move to flair and rigor. So here I'm going to talk about the story of Surf Excel. This is when I went into Hindustan Lever from Ponds. Ponds is very much a business that had a lot of flair. People were empowered, people had a lot of flair, people could do a lot of things. And at that point in time, Hindustan Lever was very much more about rigor, process, approvals, steps, market research, recheck the market research, very much about rigor about what they did. And at that time, P&G was entering India, and we knew they were going to come up with tremendous products, which Coca-Cola, Hindustan Lever, over time, because they're cost optimized their formulas, may or may not be able to match. So this is an interesting story. So I had tremendous, again, folks working with me. I had Rohit Chava and Vipul Chawla, both of whom are presidents of that business right now, working with me in the marketing team. And we discovered that literally because one of our brand people were visiting a printer press, and we discovered a proof of a detergent launched by P&G lying there, which was shameful of them to have not taken care of it, which gave us an idea of what they might be doing. So at that point in time, it was clear that if we want to match them, we will have to do something spectacular and do something fast. And luckily, at that point in time, between Harish, Arun Adhikari, who was there, and Keki Dadi Seth, who were kind of running this business, said, you have total freedom, Kandy, but don't lose this war. And within 3 weeks, we formulated, tested, and within a month, we were able to create an absolutely spectacular new brand, Surf Excel. Before that, we had only Surf. That could match and beat what we expected from P&G. In parallel, we created advertising, sales plans, and none of these had to be checked because we had no time to check and market research. These had to be done with tremendous amount of internal kind of, this seems right based on our experience, let's go do it. Let's err on the side of doing it better rather than worse. And, so there was a lot of flair in that. And that truly helped us to actually preempt P&G's launch. And actually, at that point in time, after about a year, P&G kind of scaled back their launch because of both the power of the distribution of levers, tremendous product advantage we had, the fact that we were first into the market before them with these next generation products. And all of this happened within weeks. Of course, we do need the rigor balance, to my point, because the demand just exploded. At that point in time, we had these sachets for Surf Excel, and the demand just exploded, and we couldn't do it, right? We hadn't realized that these sachets, which had enzymes, was creating this pollution in factories because the enzyme was flying all over, and there wasn't enough rigor to kind of get the... So all the rigor had to come. Without that, we wouldn't have been successful over time. But that flair helped us truly take off and prevent this huge competitor. This balance between flair and rigor, I find to be an important piece, and it varies based on business, it varies based on life cycle, but it's important for leaders to keep thinking about as they build their organization. I'm not going to talk much more about trust, accountability, invest, and future capabilities, except to say that Ponds is the best example of that, right? And here are some of the people I spoke about that I've worked with, and many more. I could not put everybody's picture here, but I think Ponds during second half of 70s and 80s had this huge ability to get the best talent, invest in this capability, and then trust them, empower them, but hold them accountable. And I think there's no doubt that it created this pipeline of success for Ponds during those periods. So I'm going to kind of stop there and see if any of our panelists want to add anything to that before go to the next subject.
Kandy, I have a comment to make. Having worked both in Ponds and Hindustan Lever for over 20 years, one of the questions that comes to my mind is what creates resilience in an institution or an organization? What gives it longevity? And you talk interestingly about flair and rigor, and I've always called it the entrepreneur professional. Within and I've seen that in droves in Hindustan Lever, which is if you were or even Ponds. I mean, I was a very young manager then. If you're completely an entrepreneur, you could sort of lose sight of governance and processes. If you're completely a professional, then you can become very bureaucratic. But when you have this combination of entrepreneur professional, then I think that creates magic. So I wonder whether you have any thoughts on what creates a lasting, because Coke is 128 years old, Hindustan Lever is 87 years old. What makes these companies go on and on with really solid performance?
Firstly, Gopal, I think that's a great way of expressing kind of what I was trying to talk about in flair and rigor balance of being entrepreneur and professional. So there is a fairly kind of relatively old business book by a person called Dr. Adizes. It's a fairly boring book. It's a thick book, but he talks about corporate life cycles. And he talks about 4 things in that. P, which is about performance culture, meaning making sure that you're focused on kind of results and things like that. A, which is administration, which is kind of this professional, what you're talking about, and the rigor that I'm talking about, which is A. E, which is the entrepreneurial side of the business, which you see a lot in startups, but you don't see in big businesses. And I, which is integration. That is the business integrated well enough internally, or it starts creating politics and divisions and silos. So, and he's done a lot of research, and I think I agree with this. It's this, the organizations that last need to watch for any one of these kind of performance orientation, administration, entrepreneur, and integration, any one of them to become dominating. You have to watch as you mature. Initially, when you start up, obviously the entrepreneur part of it needs to dominate. Over time, you need to have a balance of those. But if you don't have a balance, if you have too much integration, it becomes like a club, right? I remember there were companies in Calcutta, British companies that used to run like that. That I remember. It was greatly integrated, but it was like a club, and they all became fossils, right? Or they become over politicized, or they become, too much focused on performance. So leaders need to watch for the balance between P, A, E, and I is this theory. And I tend to believe in that. Does that make sense, Gopal? What do you?
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always, I think with Hindustan Lever, I think there's also, and this was true for Ponds. I worked with NVT. NVT was my first boss. The apprenticeship you get in these companies for young people coming in is just, unbelievable. And then, of course, you throw them different challenges, different roles, countries, categories, businesses, different contexts, and that kind of brings out this entrepreneur profession. So I agree with the points you make. It's a great framework.
And Kandy, if I can just, so one, Gopal, I was your, you call apprenticeship. I was getting my own apprenticeship. I was too young to be apprenticeship or anyone else. But I have one reaction, Kandy, and a question on the Surf Excel aerial story. I wonder if in today's world, when you talk about rigor, process, methodology, etc., and sometimes that takes time, and there's a search for at least some degree of knowing all the answers before you jump and do something. An organization jumps and does something. Whereas your Surf Excel story indicated, hey guys, I couldn't follow process. I had to quickly iterate and hope it worked, and then come back and say, okay, this piece didn't work. So it feels like a agile Scrum methodology. Do you think that the world of today is demanding much more of the Surf Excel methodology and is actually probably even more important because speed is becoming more and more important?
I have no doubt, Tiger, that is true. In every field, by the way, including whether you're, Governor of California, as you know, Tiger yesterday said, no more cars or gas cars after 2035. But, these things are moving on even age-old industries now fast, right? So, but you are a bigger expert than I am on Agile Scrum because I know you're kind of an expert on that, but I agree with you 100%. That Agile kind of methodology is the way to go. And
then the question,
your organizations are the expert on it.
No, and the question that I grapple with a lot is how do you drive it without an instigator or an agent provocateur? You're running into the information that you found in the artwork somewhere was the provocation for, hey, let's do something with Surf Excel. If that hadn't happened, so how do you do that without any provocation from the outside is a tough one.
It is. That, which is why leadership is so important, right? It needs to be provoked by leaders, essentially.
That is the flair part that he talked about. I am impressed by what Gopal called entrepreneur professional. In fact, CAMS, where I worked as a chairman for about 20 years, had that flair professionalism. It was very entrepreneurial, yet it was very strongly professional. It would whenever it did anything, there was discipline. And I had been a director in a few technology companies where there was a lot of entrepreneurship without the professionalism, and I used to feel extremely uncomfortable. I mean, you see, without the rigor, it's very difficult to work. I mean, it's a very high risk environment.
I want to just add one point, Mr. Balram, with your permission. I think, Kandy, you talked about, or I was talking about apprenticeship, and I do want to say something personal about you. I remember when you were the GSM, and I was a lowly management trainee running around in different parts of Tamil Nadu. I would send a weekly or a fortnightly report to Tiger and to you. And I remember getting back those reports with your neat handwriting. You'd read the whole thing and with your comments on it, which I think really makes a difference. And I think this is what creates lasting, institutions. It really creates the apprenticeship that I think is so important.
Thank you. Thank you, Gopal.
Well said.
All right. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on here. So cultural sensitivity is the other one, right? Whether you create an organizational culture or you create kind of a country-based culture, and each country, as you know, has its own culture. And as I've worked in many different countries, I find this is an interesting question and topic. And it seems like different companies operate differently on this particular kind of dimension. Tiger, I know you have a better story on this. Why don't you talk about it?
No, and what struck me when I spent my years at GE, which is where I spent a lot of time outside, traveling across the globe to the various businesses, it was strange for me to walk into Japan after having, on my first trip with GE, when I went through an indoctrination of what it is to do business in Japan and be told this is the Japanese culture, this is how one is supposed to behave, and this is what you're supposed to say, and so on. And consensus-driven decision-making, all that kind of stuff. And then you walk in there and you spend a week there and you realize that GE in Japan is more like GE anywhere. And you realize that actually there is such a thing as corporate and organizational culture, particularly for companies, one, that think it's important for them, and two, that are global, that over time sometimes supersedes local culture. In the end, it becomes a nuanced balance. Because when you deal with the outside world, you have to be local. But sometimes when you're dealing inside the company, you find organizational culture becomes really strong. So
Brilliant.
Like many things in life, it's about balance. And that's a learning that I had, going through. I had no opportunity to go through Unilever, but going through Citibank and then GE and now the current company that I'm in, Genpact, that's a big thing that we focus on.
Yeah, and my experience is somewhat similar because, and I'll talk a little bit about all the big change when I went to Argentina from India to run South America. But actually, the bigger difference, I believe, was just going to Coke, which is such a different company, such a different culture, than it was actually even this huge change that I had. But let's move on. I'm just doing this because I want to make sure that we spend enough time on questions and on all aspects. I know that we're also holding you up from an interesting IPL game that's coming up. So I'm going to keep the pace going. So commercial edge, I think that a lot has been spoken about, a lot has been kind of said even on these series. So none of us are going to talk a lot about commercial edge, obviously, but it's really, really important. From a consumer product company perspective, I see criticality of the experience of consumer, engagement of the customers that you deal with, and the effectiveness of the organization. And I kind of use it in a simple way, which is earn more, use less, and invest wisely. As kind of the making sure you have a commercial edge. But I'm going to skip this section, again, in the interest of time, and focus more on the kind of leadership aspects of the business. The one area I did want to speak about, and we had this session just recently by Neeraj Chandra on change and innovation. Obviously, innovations, it's important to have all kinds of innovations. It's important to innovate your core because ultimately that is your business. It's important to leverage your core, but go beyond the edge. So you're building new capabilities. And then it's also important to be disruptive. Completely new capabilities, new markets, new kind of businesses. That makes sense depending on the corporate. So I want to talk a little bit about one that actually I consider myself having failed in, having not influenced the organization enough to do one of the edge innovations. So for those of you in the US, you probably are very aware of this category. For the rest of you, may not be. There's a new category in the US on low alcoholic drinks called hard seltzers. It's basically, it's like a beer, but think about it's made like a beer. It's made from kind of, not from distilling, but by fermenting. And it is low alcohol, it's fermented sugar, but it is essentially fruit flavored, right? So it's fruit flavored drinks. It tastes like a fruit drink, but it's alcoholic. This category essentially started about 4 years, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. 2016 was the first year where White Claw, which is the market leader, was launched. And the last 12 months, it's a $5 billion category and growing at 100% a year. Okay. It's likely to be, even if it slows down on growth, it's going to be a $10 billion category. It's a tremendous, huge category, right? And White Claw and Truly, the two brands you see here, are owned between them 75%. And the reason I bring this up is now, in an organization like Molson Coors, and I was chief growth officer, so it was my responsibility. I was head of international when this happened. And then I moved to become chief growth officer to try and drive this. I found it internally impossible to convince people that this was a category that's going to grow. People said, we have seen these, there have been fads, it's going to come and go, we should focus on beer, we should focus on the core, let's not touch it, this will come and go, it'll die, people will lose money. And eventually, I mean, we did develop a pipeline, and it did get launched in 2018, 2019, but it was late. We were 2 years too late in this category. It needed new capability, it needed new investments because you ferment sugar rather than malt and needs different kind of equipments, different kind of work. So, but here is an example where if we had launched this edge innovation, Molson Coors would have been in a different place than it is today. And it lost out on this. So when you go to these kind of edge innovations, disruptive innovations within a larger organization, my learning has been that you've got to take a stand, and we'll talk about breakthrough a little bit later, much, much harder than I think certainly I did. And this is one of the areas where I think, as I think back, is something that I believe I listen to conventional wisdom versus go to where I kind of felt looking at the market and looking at the early reactions. So, you know, I just want to point out that you often learn a lot from failures, and this is one of them that personally I feel. And it's important that you learn to say, you've got to look on some of these kind of where you step out and go beyond. And I'm sure I don't know if either of you have got experiences of these kind of edge innovations, but these are important pieces. And if you miss it out, then you miss it out. Okay, let's move on. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about shaping the market. So this is going to be another exciting thing. As you know, I have moved my careers, as you can see, from detergents and levers to Coke to beer. And then over the last year, I've helped Molson Coors launch one of the first cannabis-infused beverages. So as you can see, I'm moving up the ladder of kind of products that are that make you feel happy. So, so having learned from the example that I told you that we didn't do, it was clear that regulations in the US and Canada were loosening up on ability to get cannabis. However, they were highly difficult in the sense of quality and the kind of products that were being done. Most people didn't want to smoke anyway. Most people didn't want to vape. So we came up with this concept of saying, like you drink a beer or you drink a low alcoholic beverage, how can you create a low cannabis infused beverage? So instead of the alcohol, it has cannabis, but extremely low kind of doses. So you enjoy it, you never get intoxicated tremendously unless you first misuse it. And during this set of products that we have launched with a joint venture called Trust Beverages, I had, like, as you can imagine, huge amount of internal barriers that you had to go through, a huge amount of external barriers that you had to go through. But my whole learning on this was, having learned from the previous one that we hadn't done fast, that we were not going to miss out on this. And we were able to convince our board of, and Molson Coors happens to be a family-controlled company, to convince the families, convince our management, get the regulators to approve the kind of products we wanted to launch. And these products are available right now only in Canada, which is the only place that's federally legal. But it is going to shape, over the next 5-10 years, I believe, the future of what US and Canada beverages is going to look like. So it's not yet there. So it is still early days, but it's an example where you are starting to shape the market, right? It's non-existent market. It doesn't exist, but it's going to start shaping what people are going to drink over time. So, I think it's important to think through all of them. How do you innovate? How do you kind of truly change and get to the kind of step change? And then how do you truly disrupt? And when you disrupt, you got to shape the market, not just, it's not disruption as defined by you, it's disruption as defined by the market. So with that, I'm going to kind of actually even skip the leading expertise portion. And I'm going to move to kind of stop here for some questions from the audience. Any comments, Tiger, Gopal, and then we'll move from there to the next part.
Vijay, would you like to pick one or two questions? Group captain?
Yes.
Vijay, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, sir.
Yeah. Can you pick a couple of questions for Anand?
The couple of them. In fact, we have over 1,500 viewers watching the program now live on our YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Now, there's a question which has come from Mr. Tarun Garg, actually. He says, what is the most important attribute which makes one successful in leading self, team, and organization? He also asked another question. He says, how these qualities make someone capable to lead uncertainties?
So what is the last word I didn't hear? Capable of leading?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainties. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a great, fantastic question, Tarun. And hello, Tarun. Hope you're well. Now, we're going to go into leadership, self-leadership, which is, I think, the most important part. And, I strongly believe one of the most important parts of leading the self, which is very much the next topic we're going to speak about, is what I call being out of the box. The box are a set of constraints you put on yourself. These constraints come from uncertainty, come from fear, come from ambiguity, and leads one to think about things like, how do I survive, or how do I get something I want, versus leading with the purpose which is out of the box. And I think it is not something it's natural for humans, and therefore leaders, to feel those and feel in the box. It feels often very difficult. But if you think about where am I? Is my mind state, my attitude state out of the box? Or am I in the box? And why am I in the box? I think it helps you to get out of the box. And we'll talk about that right now a little bit more in detail.
There's another question from Ms. Uma Parameshwari. He says, sir, how do you believe in trust introducing innovative products will reach in the market? How are you classifying consumer behavior? How can you be able to predict the success in these cases?
Thank you, Uma. I think that you can't predict. When you're shaping the market, you can't predict success. And this is one of the challenges why you find it difficult to do these things. People, if you look at, I don't know, think about Tesla launching electric cars, you couldn't have predicted the success of it, right? It's impossible when it was launched. It seems obvious now in hindsight, but you can't predict it. So you have to have a strong sense of belief. You have to be able to kind of have a strong sense of vision of the future. You have to be agile, and we'll talk about that while you're doing that. And you have to go make that happen. Now, will trust beverages and cannabis-infused beverages be successful? I can't predict it for 100% sure. But the reason I believe is a number of reasons, right? One, it has similar effects as a low alcohol beverage has. Second, it doesn't have a lot of the after effects, doesn't have hangovers, it doesn't have any, health issues. So there are a number of reasons why I believe it will be successful, but one has to wait and see, right, how it will be successful. And you have to have strong belief that you can shape that market and be the pioneer in the market, because there's no doubt that pioneers succeed. And, so that's something that you can get some indication from consumers, but as many people have said, Ford famously said in the 1930s, if I asked consumers, they wanted a faster horse cart, right? But he gave them a car, right? And that's not what consumers will say they want, right? So some of these you can't predict, but you have to go with that strong sense of feeling, understanding what kind of the hidden need is, not the stated need is of the consumers. If you're okay, we'll move on, Group Captain.
Yeah, go on.
Sure, please go ahead.
So, very much talking about what I've just started talking about, which is attitude motivation, out of the box, growth mindset, and breakthrough thinking, which I think is really important when you lead yourself. So, out of the box, as I already kind of mentioned in answer to that question, you end up constraining yourself, putting yourself into a box, all right? Sometimes because you think you can't do it, sometimes because you want to survive, sometimes you put yourself in a box because you think you're doing it as an obligation, not because, it's an obligation, I have to do it, or you're doing it because you really desire something, versus being out of all of these kind of human needs, but doing it because you believe in it. And typically when you think about people who are out of the box, who didn't care about survival or didn't do it as an obligation, you think of these great leaders, right? It's Kandy or Mandela or Martin Luther King, who didn't do it with a kind of a box mentality and went through all these issues. But of course, when you're in business, you're not thinking, sorry?
Sorry, apologies.
Go on.
You're usually not thinking of such lofty things. You're talking about, more mundane, simpler things. And I want to talk about the time when I was in the box. And And it took me a little while to kind of think through this and kind of get out of the box. So as I explained to all of you, I went to Pons. I ran marketing in Latin America. From there, I moved to Atlanta to be the global head of marketing of the soft drink brands for Coke. This was, at a time when Coke was the most valuable brand in the world, as per the Brandsy surveys. So it was a tremendous role. It was probably the most exciting marketing job in the world. But Coke was in trouble. It was declining over the last many years. Coke, meaning the soft drink portfolio, but specifically Coca-Cola trademark, which had Coca-Cola and Diet Coke. And at that point in time, it was clear to me that Coca-Cola had to do something different. And I proposed something, and I'll talk about that in the breakthrough thinking. And inevitably, there were a series of changes because Coke was not successful. Coke was declining there. So the first gentleman on the top left is Doug Ivester. We missed out on buying Gatorade, which was something that came to Coke on the table, but he felt was not needed. And Pepsi bought it. And then, of course, that turned out to be quite a mistake. And then subsequently from there, it moved to Doug Daft, came in from Asia, who was rather volatile. I think in this forum, I will be polite and say he was volatile. And he couldn't manage it. So nobody was making decisions. That very poor people they brought with them. They brought with them entourages. And all of them were focused on not just them were in the box, they created everybody else in the box. As a result, I kind of decided this was not working for me. And because there was nothing that I could do that I could launch. Inevitably, I was getting these volatile reactions from my bosses and CEOs. And it was like end of the road for me. Till eventually, Neville Isdell, whom you see on the bottom left, came on, and he started creating this whole concept. Actually, this model that I'm talking about, in a way, I learned from Neville Isdell. And he started creating this purposeful organization, created back into a business that made sense, and we were able to do inevitable things. I think Coke lost out, not only the Gatorade acquisition, I think they lost out on doing quite a few things during these black years, because as a leader, when you're in the box, which these gentlemen were, it also creates everybody else in the box working for you. Similar thing happened more personally. I had a big acquisition that I was leading for Molson Coors. It was the first time Molson Coors was going out of kind of its core market. And we bought the Central and Eastern European business for $3.5 billion in 2012. And in this case, I was in the box for personal reasons. I had some health challenges in the family. And I just started doing this deal as a kind of, I have to do it for obligation, but I really wasn't able to focus. And then, I remembered this framework, and I decided I was not going to do it. I flew back from London, back to Denver, attended first to what was pressing on the family side, which was putting me in the box. And then with the support of my family, I was able to feel free and go back. And we were able to do this deal, which transformed Molson Coors eventually. And I think it's important to, this is more about self-awareness, to know where you are and whether or not you're able to kind of get out of the box yourself. And if you think about why you're in the box, why you're having fear, why you're trying to survive, or why you feel this is an obligation rather than something you really feel deep inside, I think it's an important piece for leaders to constantly think about. It is very similar to what Atul Vora mentioned as Nishkam kind of values that you have in his talk. And that's something you can keep questioning as you go through. And everybody will go through these cycles of going in the box and out of the box. I also want to talk a little bit about growth mindset. Of course, now made famous recently by Satya Nadella in Microsoft. Of course, came from Carol Dweck. I think Microsoft has grown 10 times in market cap over the last, I don't know how many years, but 6-7 years. And truly has, I think, transformed itself with the growth mindset. And in a smaller way, I felt that, Mr. Balaram, as I went from levers to Coke, I talked about the differences in culture. But remember, I was moving from cricket to football, from eating the kind of the thali meal to nothing but barbecues available for food, nothing else, literally, from Spanish to English. And there was this interesting episode I had. So I went there in January 1998. That's when I joined Coke. As marketing director, there was a World Cup in France in 1998. Coke was the big sponsor. All my countries in South America were football crazy, right? This World Cup was the biggest thing. So we were in the middle of a lot of market research, trying to understand consumers. We created this huge, we wanted to create a tremendous campaign. And we had this advertising agency, one of the most creative I worked with in my life, based in Buenos Aires, called Aguja and Bachetti. And there was this, finally, here is the creative presentation. So Ramon Aguja comes up, he's the creative head, and great flair. He presents this tremendous creative campaign. And, I hear all of that with my team, and I say, that's a tremendous campaign, but you're missing this thing we learned about audience wanting to be as much part of it as the players. I think you're missing this, in the way you're expressing it. So he looks at me and says, Kandy, you're so insightful. That's what it says in Spanish.
Fantastic.
Of course, everything was being translated to me, right, in English. So I thought about it at that time. This was February 10th or 15th of 1998, and I realized I could not do my job because, I just couldn't do my job. He said, well, that's exactly what the words say in Spanish. Wrongly translated for you. So I said, fine, let's do the campaign, which turned out to be quite successful. And then I turned around, I told my team, it was a challenge, right? Growth mindset is about challenges that help you grow, right? It's about saying, I can learn what I want. And I told my team, okay, we are in end of February. I know you're doing a lot of work because you're doing the work in Spanish, translating in English for me, etc. From June 1, we will stop working in English. We will only work in English. So I set myself this goal, saying in 3 months, we will only do in Spanish.
Wow.
And I kind of said it to my team, and I called a town hall, I called my team, with all these people. And, of course, that meant I had to do a lot of things, right? Apart from kind of reading my lessons and working with the teacher, I stopped listening to English radio, English TV. I stopped looking at English newspapers, completely cut myself off. If I understand or not Spanish newspapers, Spanish news as I'm driving to office. And sure enough, certain thing happened. One of our distributors, started cursing one of my kind of regional marketing people in one of the other countries. This was in end of May in Spanish, thinking I didn't know it, right? and I kind of, that was the time that also broke my barrier. And I stood up and I started speaking to him in Spanish and said, no way in hell you'll ever speak to my person like that. And kind of broke my internal barrier. And I was able to thereafter to move. And, this is a kind of idea of a personal growth, but this is true in general of a number of things that all of us do and businesses do, and how you lead businesses, about kind of learning on things that are challenges, but then using it to grow. And Gopal, I know that you had a lot of experiences, growth mindset. Why don't you give us some of your experience here?
Thanks, Kandy. I think, I've been in Airtel now for 8 years, and we've seen a brutally competitive market. So about 3.5, 4 years ago, the new player entered, put in about $50 billion of capex in just a matter of 3 to 4 years, very deep pockets. We had invested about 45 billion over almost 25 years. And for almost 9 to 10 months, they gave away services completely free. Completely free. And you don't see that anywhere else in any other market. A lot of regulation went against us, favored the new player. And in the process, 8 players got bankrupted. The number 2 and number 3 player merged to become the number 1 player for a brief while, but then went rapidly from 48% market share down to 23% and continuing to fall. And through this, we started at about 30% market share before the battle began. And today we are at a lifetime high of about 34.5%. With our business going through digital channels, we have over 150 million digital users and about 1,500 strong digital team. And if I look at, it's obviously been a crazy period for me personally. And if I look at the, the lessons that I learned, I think the first lesson is, what we talked about earlier, which is how do you think like an owner, which is this entrepreneur professional piece that I've talked about. And I think the real difference here is that if you look at a professional, typically they look for certainty. And in our context, everything was changing, right? So, how do you focus yourself on input over output? We changed our metrics. Forever, the entire operating teams used to be measured on revenue growth and margin. But we knew revenue was going to fall and we knew margin was going to fall. So what should you target them on? And one of the things that, after a lot of debate, we decided to say, let's target them on inputs, which is how do you hold your cost? How do you drive a better experience? And as a consequence, how do you gain market share, even in a compressed market? The second thing I learned is that, I've been 8 years as CEO, and I think Tiger and I were talking about that earlier. You become part of the woodwork. You get to a position of complacency. And so I have this ritual for the last 5.5, 6 years, where every December, in the 4th week of December, I take a week off and I think to myself that I've been fired. And I say, if I've been fired, how do I look at this business afresh? And what do you really need to do in this business? And initially I wrote it to myself. And then I decided, let me send it to the chairman of the company. And now I send it to the team as well. So it kind of breaks down that defensiveness and I think creates the right recognition of the context. The second thing I learned is, Kandy, that you really need to be very, very flexible. I mean, we're in an ecosystem. The technology is changing rapidly. Our customers are changing even more so. And so, I believe we need an emergent strategy. Nothing is certain. So you've got a broad direction of where you're going, but you've got to navigate the environment so that you get there. And you can only do this if you're really, truly curious. So how do you put into your system, and for me personally, the rituals that you need to actually unleash that curiosity. How do you get inspired from others? So, whether it's expeditions, visiting other companies, vendors, equipment providers, and of course, customers. And even today I do, despite COVID, at least 2 days of virtual market visits across the country. And the third thing I learned is that at this time, more than any other, alignment and culture is really, really important. Because, things are changing. People are sort of, people can very easily feel like losers. So what are the rituals that you have? For example, we very thoughtfully thought about the rituals in terms of like we're a service company. So we have a daily ritual where every store between 8 and 8:30 actually get together and talk about what worked well the previous day and what didn't, and how did we serve customers well or did not serve customers. Top-down alignment obviously is important, but I think the most important thing I think you talked about is horizontal alignment. And I think that starts with authenticity, feedback that's open, vulnerability, and having conversations about where we are in a very honest and safe environment. And I think that kind of brings people together and then creates a great degree of alignment. So those are some of the things that I've sort of seen in these last 4-5 years.
That's great learning indeed.
I love the think as though you're getting fired in the last week of December concept. It's actually very funny. And I guess it's partly driven by the roots of where we all started our careers. There are so many aspects, Gopal, actually, of what you said, and Kandy, what you've talked about so far that are so close to the way I think that actually it's a little eerie. So what I think about is, what if a new CEO is hired tomorrow? What would she do, or what would he do? And you better be ready to do it. Otherwise you're not doing the right thing. And I think what you just described in your story, and Kandy, your story of Diet Coke and Coke Zero, etc., is the more successful you've been, or a company has been, or you've been, or the team has been, the more there is a danger that you don't want to do anything that even a little bit blemishes that success, because you really are scared. Because sometimes the next thing is going to cannibalize the old thing, and are you ready to cannibalize your old stuff that has been so successful? That's the biggest problem with most humans.
Yep, no, I agree with you. Well, thank you. So, with that, we got one more thing to speak about. I mean, this is and really talking about breakthrough thinking, which is, how do you truly take a stand to transform? By the way, this breakthrough thinking holds good for anybody personally as well, but to take a stand and then understand what biases and beliefs are not working. And this is the tough part, I go to the point you just made, right? Which is, it's very tough to identify your own beliefs and biases that are not working, and then decide what's the path to breakthrough and be agile and dynamic, right? Because things will always change, and don't give up. Right? Because inevitably, it's not a straight line to success. And you see Apple or Tesla as good examples. And talking of Diet Coke, I thought let's see if we can make a ad work. So Diet Coke, so this was 2004. Diet Coke was successful, but declining, as I mentioned to you. Coke was declining, but it was 25% of the $6 billion profit that Coke was making at that time. And therefore, it was like a sacred cow, right? Nobody would touch it. But what was happening was we were losing users. We had a very narrow base of users, and each of them were drinking literally 800 or 900 Diet Cokes a year, right? So we had a narrow base, drinking a lot, but reducing. And it was clear that Coke is not going to succeed unless they did something different. So let me show you what Diet Coke stood for and why people would not touch it. I don't know if the commercial doesn't work, we will move on.
Kandy, I don't think it's working. I don't think it's appearing on the screen.
It's coming on his screen. I can see from his glasses.
He can't hear.
Yeah, we can't see it.
Yeah. He'll be able to hear only after he finishes the commercial.
No, Shankar, can you check? His video is not coming on our screen. Can you play the YouTube, what is given, the link?
Was that visible?
No, it wasn't, Kandy.
I'm going to avoid it, therefore. So what is visible right now?
It's the pitch page, Living Leadership Breakthrough Thinking.
Can you check?
Hi.
Shankar?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to avoid the thing. Let me finish the story and get to questions. Essentially, Diet Coke was very much a woman's drink meant to, for professional women who were looking after kind of their figure in a way. And it was 25% of the profit, not growing, very narrow base. And of course, as I had mentioned earlier, we had also lost out on the acquisition of Gatorade to Pepsi. So at that point in time, my team and I kind of said, we're going to grow Coke after the decade of decline. We're going to grow it by over 20%. How are we going to do this? We knew we had no real support of senior management because they were all scared of doing something that will bias, that will cannibalize Diet Coke, which is so important. They were all scared of because New Coke had bombed. They didn't want to do anything different with Coke. And eventually they developed a product that won with men, right? And also won with, and because Diet Coke is such a woman-oriented product, we initially launched the product. It wasn't a roaring success because it was a white can, lesser known secret. And then eventually, actually in Australia, they came up with this, said, I think the can should be black. So then we launched Coke Zero, which is in a black can. And today is actually between Coke and Diet Coke. In the US, they are of course bigger than Coke, but globally they're among the top profit earners for Coke. And it could not get launched till this bias was there, till a new CEO came on board. So there are a number of things you've got to do. And we didn't give up, right? We kept pushing the idea till we were able to get it launched, even though we got no, maybe half a dozen times, because we believed in it and it turned out to be obviously very successful. So with that, I'm going to get back, I know we've got like 5-10 minutes, so let's get back to any last comments, Gopal or Tiger, and then let's get to questions.
I think, Kandy, just one question. You talked about being in the box, and I think Tiger referred to that as well, because one of the things that happens is that when things are not going well, most people are propelled to action because that's easy and your backs are against the wall. But when things are going well, how do you peer around the bend and how do you change the context and how do you overcome that fear of inaction? I think it's something that is a real struggle. So, and it seems to me that Diet Coke and Coke Zero are kind of in that zone because it wasn't that it was broken, it wasn't that it was declining, but you had an ambition to grow, and so that was a big shift.
Yeah, I think Gopal, it's a great question. I think both of you mentioned kind of your possible way of doing it, thinking if I was a new CEO, if I get fired, things you'll do. That's one mechanism. But I think this on breakthrough, I think breakthrough versus business as usual. That's how I think about it, right? Business as usual, it's extremely comforting. It's extremely good, especially if the organization is kind of reasonably successful. Why change anything that's not broken? People often say this, right? But I think it's really important for leaders at the top, but in general for anybody, no matter which place in the organization you are, to say, what is my stand? And this stand could be sometimes personal, but I'm talking from a business context. So you may be running a sales region or a small office or whatever. What's the stand you take? That seems kind of so daring, so difficult that it's impossible to see an easy way there. A stand is not something you do that's an incremental change or a path is clear. You've got to take a stand of something that is extremely difficult. That's a leap, right? That's something that you don't see a path to easily. Because once you do that, then you focus on saying, okay, what are the possible pathways? And there has to be more than one because you're not sure of the answer. Because if you knew, it's not a breakthrough stand. Right? So I find that this exercise to do is a useful exercise to force yourself into saying, I will take a stand that is something that I don't know the answer for, and then figuring out how to get there. But everybody has their own way to do it. I mean, Tiger, your way of saying.
No, so Kandy, actually, your Coke story reminded me of something that I have become a big believer in over the years, which is, I think I have to say, hats off to Coke for having someone who did not have any experience in Latin America and actually did not have any experience in beverages and say, you become the marketing leader of Latin America as a geography with a different culture, and beverage. And typically, if you ask me what is culture, one of the aspects of culture is what do you eat? Those are the things that actually become very close to culture. And I'm a big believer that if you're trying to do breakthrough thinking, bring people into the team who have no clue what you're talking about, who come at it in life with very different perspectives and experiences, and actually almost become a cat among the pigeons, and create an environment as a leader where you actually support the cat among the pigeons.
Well done.
That's
So
a
That's a great point.
yeah. So you need to have some mavericks in the room. So diversity and all of that therefore becomes important. But it's actually important for business breakthrough, not just because you want to do good things. It's actually business breakthrough.
So the other thing I've seen, Kandy and Tiger, is that a breakthrough or a stand really comes out of very, very deep conviction. And the deep conviction is not just based on the data that you see and the patterns that you see, but really of having seen it, having felt it, having smelt it. And there's something more intangible about that conviction, which you can see when the person's talking to you and the way their eyes light up, and and that's a very important sort of intangible that helps you make that or take that stand.
But Gopal, here is the additional thing. 100% agree with you, but I'll say one additional thing which almost goes counter to what you just said. Deep conviction, deep belief, but a willingness to change it, because now the maverick in the room has convinced you that actually you should change. So you then stand up and say, guys, as of yesterday, my belief was this. I'm beginning to change my belief because I think the world is changing. And here, Mary just told us that actually we have to think differently. That combo is a tough combo.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Balram, any comments from you, or should we go to some more questions?
I think we have, you see, this is left to myself, I would continue for another half an hour, but I think we have the IPL pressure on us. It's going very well. Let's take a couple of questions and then close. Since the IPL is there.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a question from, can I go over to the question, sir? There's a question from Srikant Shastri. Anand, you spoke about how working at Coke was a big change and learning experience. Can you tell us how important was working in totally different continent, South America?
Yeah, Srikant, hi. At least we're speaking through this medium, so that's great. I think that so when you go from a very familiar organization where I knew everybody, where I had networks, where I could informally talk to anybody from Pawns or over time I'd built in levers as well, into a completely new environment in the office where everybody speaks in Spanish to each other. I didn't understand a word, but even though kind of the working language is English, and a very American culture where kind of people were extremely direct, pushy. I was used to kind of less. I was used to much more rounded around the edges kind of culture, and here was a culture that was sharp on the edges, right? And highly competitive, right? Highly competitive in terms of the way people would deal with it. And as an outsider, that I found that to be more difficult, when I said it was more difficult than Argentina, is that my friends where I lived or my community where I lived, they were easier to get through to, right? Even if I didn't, get through to. Like my twin daughters, Priyanka and Pratibha, were at that time 7 years old, right? 7 or 8 years old. And as soon as they came, they went into a summer camp. It was January, the summer there in the southern hemisphere, and they didn't understand a word of Spanish. The other kids were all Spanish speaking, but they were able to integrate, right? So outside was easier because people understand each other, but at work was so much more challenged to kind of get used to what works here, right? How do you create influence? How do you make things happen? How do you create allies? That was much more difficult to fully get to speed with.
Can we take one last question, Mr. Balraman?
Yeah, last one.
Yes. The question from a student from VIT school, Mr. Ali. He said, with the current technological advancements in various industries due to the rise in usage of artificial intelligence, do you think it has, in fact, negatively affecting the job market? Also, what are your tips on how could one startups or any other businesses could possibly boom in this pandemic? This is a worry most of the students have, sir. With the AI is going to impact their placement and job. Maybe I think
Yeah.
it'll be.
So, Ali, those are really good questions. I think I don't believe artificial intelligence personally, but I'll kind of defer to Gopal, who's probably more of an expert on this. But I don't believe it affects the job market. It just changes the job market. It just transforms the job market. And I think as far as entrepreneur or startup is concerned, I think the best thing I find is you've got to find a mentor. If you're thinking about it and how you want to do it, find somebody you trust, somebody who can be a mentor, and I think that's one good way. But both Tiger and Gopal are in kind of artificial intelligence business more than I have been, so I defer to them on the first question.
No, I completely agree with you, with your perspective, Kandy, that I don't think AI or machine learning, like many other technologies of the past, are going to ultimately destroy jobs. They will change jobs. So therefore, new people need to learn new skills. They will integrate into people's work, just as using Excel spreadsheet is the way an accountant does accounting today. 50 years back, they didn't do accounting by using a calculator or Excel spreadsheet. But that doesn't reduce the need for accountants. Now the transition is painful. People who learn are going to find it easy to transition. Younger people will find it easier to transition. So therefore, society and everyone else has to play a role in transition. But in the end, it's beneficial. I mean, 2 billion people are going to have access, and I think, Gopal, you can speak to this, are going to have access to microfinance, micro education, micro healthcare because of your technology from Airtel and because of AI and machine learning.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Tiger, with what you're saying. Totally agree with what you're saying.
Balraman, our admin, Mr. Tyagarajan, has got a question. Shall we take this as the last question?
Okay.
Mr. Tyagarajan? Okay. This is a question from our Ponds veteran, Mr. Tyagarajan. In the situation of Diet Coke pack color change, was it possible to do a test market in a smaller zone, demonstrate it to the, say, your new sayers before doing a real change? Your views on this?
Firstly, I have to thank you because it was his support that this kind of talk was possible. So thank you for that, firstly. But secondly, on your question, so Diet Coke color never changed, it was always silver gray. When we launched Coke Zero, we thought we'll make it white. That was kind of the wisdom from the research and the groups. But eventually, when we launched it, and it was being done in a test market, so it was launched in Australia, it turned out to be that it wasn't working as well. And then actually the Australian team came up with saying, no, that's based on what we see, we think it should be black. And they launched the black Coke Zero, and they made the success from the so the strategic concept was there, but the success was made by them, and they launched the black can. And I think it was based on in a way, a regional test market from a global company perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Kandy. On behalf of Mr. Balraman, chairman of the session, and all the members of MMA, we would like to appreciate your sparing your valuable time to share your insights to the members. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to present on your behalf to the people who are in need today the mask, I think, which really protects them. On your behalf, we are presenting 300 masks. We go to different NGOs and different locations where the need is really critical. our team visit these places and hand over the mask personally to them. So, thank you so much for accepting our kind gesture. This is our team visiting different places and hand over the thing. Thank you so much, sir. And now I request Mr. Balraman for his closing remarks. We will before we conclude the session, sir. Mr. Balraman.
Yeah. This was like listening to a book written by three very experienced authors, listening to the life story of Kandy Anand, as he's called, and Gopal Vittal and Tiger Tyagarajan. I am unable to keep the book down. So I'm looking for the sequel, and I'm looking forward to listening to a lot more. It has been said that leadership can be described but cannot be defined. And when I listen to three of you, each one coming with extremely appealing arguments, sometimes totally different from each other, that statement appeals to me, that you can describe leadership but you cannot define it, because each leader is his own. So leadership is very much of an art as much as there is some science to it. Harvard Business School is doing a lot of research on leadership. And so we'll have time to talk about that. We'll have time to join in discussions on that. So until then, very, very warm thanks to Kandy for spending a lot of time, getting up very early in the morning and talking to us. And thank you, Gopal. I know you are under enormous time pressure. And thank you, Tiger. I know you too are under enormous time pressure. Thank you for your valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balram. Thank you, Group Captain.
Kandy, thank you.
Tiger.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Balraman.
Gopal.
Thank you, Kandy. Thank you, Tiger. Thank you, Group Captain.
Thank you, viewers who logged in, watched the program. In spite of the IPL match, I think most of you are still in. Go and enjoy the match. And yes, Mr. Balraman.
This is the first program that has been 76% of the audience has scored excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kandy, and thank you, Tiger. Thank you, Mr. Gopal. We're looking forward to seeing you more often in MMA. Thank you, Mr. Balraman. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining. Again, log in on Monday. Another great evening, another great panelist. Look forward to seeing you. Go enjoy the match and have a great weekend. I think you'll have a great weekend after this inspiring talk what we all had from outstanding panelists. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy. Till we meet again. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you.
God bless. All the best. Thank you.